questions?
Do you have any support among the black community?
Yes, this campaign, as I said, we're trying to build a strong coalition. I have many members of the Harlem community and East Harlem community that are already on board. We will be talking about that as I move forward and in the future. I haven't formally announced the candidacy, but if and when I do that, I will be rolling out some endorsement that many people in this room will feel very proud of.
Have you spoken to Al Sharpton?
I went to his church, yes, and I spoke to him. I went to the National Action Network, and I spoke to him. I know that the Reverend is also a figure in the Harlem community, one that should be spoken to and heard from, yes.
Yes, Michael.
What sorts of other federal issues do you find very interesting? Transportation funding, do you see any changes for the Affordable Care Act? You'd like, if Congress were not so gridlocked over the issue?
Well, you know, transportation funding is one that requires very often, whether at the state level or even at the federal level, deep dollars, deep pockets. You know, this is not the governor just recently announced that he is going to be opening up 3 Metro North stations in the Bronx. And that's a very expensive endeavor. And so we must not only look at transportation improvement across the country as a traditional transportation issue, but also as a job creating issue. I think if you look at what happened right in the middle of the Deep Depression, Franklin D. Roosevelt did 2 things. He engaged in major public works, and he also created the minimum wage. And people now push back at the minimum wage in the midst of this recession and say, why and how can we pay people more money? Well, you know, Franklin D. Roosevelt saw it as a totally different thing. He saw it as an economic stimulus. He said, if I give that family an additional $100 in their pocket a week, they're going to go right to that local business, to that local grocery store, to that local shoe store. They're going to spend it right in the neighborhood, and they're going to motivate the economy. And by the way, small businesses continue to be the biggest employer in the country. Not the big box stores, not the Targets of the world. Those folks are pushing to keep the minimum wage where it is right now and recycle workers. And so you cannot survive on $7.25, which was the original minimum wage, and now $8. I'm pushing at the state level to have the minimum wage up immediately to $9. Our union senator, Kristen Gillibrand, is pushing to have the minimum wage up to over $10. You know, President Obama just recently spoke about upping the minimum wage for contracted workers. And so I look at transportation funding not from the traditional perspective of how we should have a better infrastructure, and we should, but also how can we connect that effort to job creation and economic development. And I think that's very important. I think the other area at the federal level, which is very important, is housing. You know, HUD at one point was a very vigorous agency that invested dollars in the creation of affordable housing and housing across the nation. Now HUD is an absentee landlord. We need to fight in Congress to make sure that more resources are applied for the creation of affordable housing and middle-income housing across the country. And that would also create jobs. So I think that we're not thinking smart as a nation. You know, we're investing money without looking at opportunities for job creation. And I think it should be done both ways.
Hi, from the Riverdale Press. I think since the Congress, you could say, is a much more conservative body than any body in New York, whether it's city or state, how would you try to bring into effect the many progressive priorities that New Yorkers cherish?
Well, I think one of the problems that we had is that many Democrats have half-stepped President Obama in his very ambitious agenda. You know, when you look at the health care reform that he tried to enact and pass into law, very ambitious, you know, to bring, you know, you have a 26-year-old who somehow always seems to come back home to you, right? And yet, you know, that 26-year-old may feel that he or her is you know, immortal. They will never get sick. They will never die. You know, they can get sick one day, and if they're not covered, you know, that can really wipe out your savings. My son got an appendicitis operation when he was 21 years old. He felt that, you know, he was immortal and nothing will go wrong. And this particular bill covers that. But just as important is for insurance companies, right? not to take into account a pre-existing condition. So if you suffer from hypertension, or if you suffer from diabetes, or any other condition that would normally disqualify you from any kind of health coverage, you know, this bill now encompasses some coverage and brings some coverages for that. So, but you know, it was much broader than that. I think that the healthcare reform initiative was not just about healthcare; it was really also about our economy. Because aside from some of the bad things that happen in Wall Street and within the financial institutions, you know, the cost of healthcare in this nation is out of control. And you know, if you had any relative that's been in a week, 2 weeks, a month in the hospital, you know that if you have no insurance, you're wiped out. You lose your home, you lose everything. And so this is unsustainable. And so healthcare reform was not only to bring healthcare, but it was also to give a shot of energy to the local, the U.S. economy. And I think President Obama was half-stepped by many Democrats. I hope to be a Democrat that will stand right behind President Obama and push for very progressive things that will make this nation better, that I'm sure that many things that you're that hold very dear and near to your heart. You know, the student loan issue that was, you know, just mentioned by the Reverend. You know, many people, after they go to college, they take, you know, when they finish paying off their student loan, they're ready to kick in for their kids. So it's a permanent debt. It's a permanent debt. And maybe that disallows them from buying that home, from moving to the middle class. So there's a lot of work to be done in Congress. But rather than half-stepping the president, I think we should be standing right behind him, you know, and pushing for his agenda.
All right. Last question.
Yeah, you mentioned before you were supporting Israel and wanted to.
We can't hear you.
Sorry, you mentioned earlier your support for Israel and working with Congressman Engel, and I'm just wondering how you would vote on a bill that increases sanctions.
I will vote for increased sanctions on Iran. I think that unfortunately, you know, the efforts to review and investigate their capability to build up nuclear weapons is not really, although some people claim it's verifiable. At the very least, we should be very vigilant of their capabilities to build nuclear capacity. And I think that they're a danger not only to Israel, but to the entire region. And by the way, Iran is no longer just a Middle East issue. Iran is right in our back door. They're in Central America, they're in South America, they have relationships with some of the rough governments there, and we should be vigilant of that as well.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.